And welcome back to the Morning Blend, where we're transforming your health with Columbia St. Mary's, part of Ascension. Epilepsy is a neurological disorder that causes seizures, and it may be more common than you think.
In fact, 1 in 26 people get epilepsy sometime in their lifetime. So here with more on the causes and the treatments is Dr. George Morris. Great to see you back here on the Morning Blend. One of the things that's fascinating, we're going to talk about in just a second, is that the brain can actually heal, which is, I think, amazing, right?
Well, the brain can be injured and has lots of mechanisms by which it can actually remedy that. But it needs time. And one of the problems with epilepsy in certain circumstances where the brain's been damaged is that if the seizures continue, then that healing process doesn't get a chance to happen. So it's of ultimate necessity that we stop seizures at the earliest possible time, so the brain has that healing capacity to start doing that.
Some of the things that can cause it can be genetic, infection, or injury, as you mentioned. What exactly is a seizure? What's happening in your brain when it goes on?
A seizure is a behavioral change in someone that's the reflection of the sudden increase in cell activity. Much differently than most people think, a seizure is not a short circuit, it's more like a power surge. That cells that normally would know not to come on at certain times lose that ability through the injury, and then they all come on at the same time. And if enough of them do that simultaneously, then you wind up with this thing that we outwardly identify as a seizure. That process is going on under the surface, even without the seizures occurring. And we know that that becomes less common if we stop the seizures from occurring. The brain is a very flexible organ. It changes. It's changing right now. Yours is changing right now. You're hearing new things. Seizures take advantage of that. They take advantage of the ability to refine and make a certain circuit more sturdy, and so you wind up with more difficult to control seizures. And if you stop the seizures, you wind up with less difficulty.
I know one of the things you always say is that epilepsy is a lot more common than we might think. I often associate it with something that people have or maybe first have in childhood, but it's not just in kids that you diagnose epilepsy, right?
The vast majority of people develop epilepsy in adulthood. While we think of epilepsy as a childhood illness, 85% of epilepsy is in adulthood, and the highest frequency of epilepsy is in those over the age of 65 who develop it from injuries from stroke.
Gotcha. Is it treatable? I hear of a lot of people being on medication for epilepsy.
You know, one of the difficulties with this is that our treatments are partially successful. 50% of people will go from a first medication because it doesn't work or it causes side effects to a second medication. And then actually as they go to the third and fourth, they see very little success. I think that has created a complacency within physicians and patients that they no longer expect seizure freedom, which is absolutely wrong. For those 1 out of 3 people who don't get seizures stopped with medication, there are lots of other options. We're developing more options all the time. We're refining what we understand about seizures so that we may resect them, we may resect the place where the seizure comes from and just get rid of that starting spot so the seizures stop. Or we are starting to understand the circuitry of the seizure, and that we can devise stimulations that actually train the brain to resist the abnormal activity and stop seizures.
See, I think that's great news, because I think people, you know, you talk about complacency. I would also think depression would be high among people with epilepsy, anxiety, especially if they're treatment resistant or they're told, hey, we've done as much as we can, you're going to have to live with seizures. So that's a really good news here, and important for people who are listening to hear you say, which is even if you've tried a lot of these things and haven't had success in stopping the seizures, there's new hope. Now, let's talk about the vagus nerve stimulation, because a lot of people are familiar with the vagus nerve as it relates to fainting, for example, because that's often the nerve involved with people who faint, but there's a correlation here with epilepsy.
Well, what's been found is that the right vagus nerve is one of the cranial nerves that exit the skull, and the vagus nerve actually extends throughout the body, but it's mostly the right vagus nerve. Turns out the left vagus nerve does very little outward into the body and has a lot of potential to provide a pathway into the brain. It was observed that you could stop a seizure by stimulating the vagus nerve in animals. So when they appreciated that, they started to show that by repeatedly stimulating the vagus nerve, you could actually stop seizures from even occurring. And the technology is advanced to the point where we have automated detection, where we look at the heart rate of the individual, and if it suddenly increases, indicative of the brain causing the heart rate increase, it delivers a shock which stops the seizure.
Wow.
If it's stopped, can people heal and can they end their seizures?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We have lots and lots of information about the ability to withdraw therapy successfully once somebody has been seizure-free long enough. The brain will heal, but you have to give it a chance.
I think it's great. People can make an appointment with you through Columbia St. Mary's at 414-585-6763 to make an appointment with Dr. Morris, or visit columbia-stmarys.org. Thanks so much for being here.
So important. Don't stop trying.
Yeah.
Don't stop looking. There are lots of ways to stop seizures.
I was
Great
just going to
message.
say, don't give up. Thanks, Dr. Morris. Great to
Appreciate
see
it.
you.
Great to see you too.